Cheers, guys. Yeah.
Why wasn't there a better plan?
Again?
Is this really the country that we want to be?
Let all Americans come to Canada so we could be safe and happy and free.
That's the kind of thing that we need. We need to move forward and be more inclusive.
It's quite upsetting.
That's not the way it works.
People might think that you actually haven't bent this curve at all, and that actually you don't have the track record.
Save us from Trump. Please save us.
The challenge is politics doesn't work in, thoughtful, reasonable conversations anymore. It happens in sound bites, in shouted slogans, in bumper stickers, in 10-second video clips.
I agree with that. Politics shouldn't be about slogans and bumper stickers, but about discussing and detailing the policies. However, is that what Trudeau does? Does he live up to this ideal? This video looks at the answer tactics of politicians, with Trudeau as the case study. It highlights which word choice to watch out for in political interviews as well as in daily conversations. If you like the video, click the like button and subscribe for more videos. Welcome aboard.
Just coming back to immigration for a second, have you ruled out changing the targets?
That's a specific and unambiguous question, the kind of question that politicians fear the most. We can always judge a question's impact by the degree to which the politician dodges it. And Trudeau does indeed dodge the question. Listen to what he says.
I think that we're seeing right across the country the impacts of the labor shortage, and they are part of the solution as well. Yes, we need to make sure we're working with the provinces and municipalities and private and public sector partners to respond to that, but there's lots we can do.
The first thing to take note of is the discrepancy between the short question and the long answer. This suggests that the speaker finds the question problematic and potentially uncomfortable, and Trudeau can't hide his initial uncomfortable reaction to the question. Trudeau uses two prominent self-protective tactics. One, association by using the so-called institutional we, so that he's not alone in seeing and wanting this, presumably.
We're seeing right across the country the impacts of the labor shortage.
Two, he says yes as if he's being properly responsive to the issues that the question raised, when that's not entirely accurate, to say the least.
Yes, we need to make sure we're working with the provinces.
He points to other entities, thus he answers a very different question than the one he was asked.
Have you ruled out changing the targets?
This is why politicians need to be interrupted the second they don't give a direct answer to a direct question, because as part of their media training, they've been taught to modify questions for self-benefit. Everything they say is geared towards self-promotion. It's not any different from a salesperson, except that the politician has more power.
But have you ruled out changing the targets, or are you going to keep
Every year we put out new
now?
targets, and we'll adjust those targets as necessary. But we're going to continue to know that immigration is a way to grow the economy and create more housing and create better healthcare services in a way that really matters for people.
With his overlap and generic non-answer, Trudeau continues to show just how inconvenient this question is. Generic because he says they'll adjust the targets as necessary without defining what as necessary means, compared to what and why. He says they'll continue to know, not continue to believe. So he's taken an assertive stance on these targets. However, if it's only positive, why the need to potentially adjust the numbers, as he just finished saying? This would have been a relevant question to ask. The words "really matters for people" highlight that he's a considerate leader, considering the well-being of people, allegedly.
A way that really matters for people, really matters for people.
This is the get-out-of-jail-free card for politicians. If the policies they're discussing are controversial and problematic, the politician's always busy mentioning why it benefits people, supposedly. Strangely enough, he doesn't bring attention to his own self-interest in implementing these policies. And this particular topic was also controversial 7 years ago.
Well, for me, I try to bring it down to the actual people and the individuals. When you ask if they really, when they think about that, they're really thinking about the shopkeeper down the street who they see every day and goes, no, that guy's great, but it's just in general and you realize that it's a nebulous fear that is latched onto an idea, but it's not actually tangible.
This question dodging reminds me of one of the most striking passages in the CNN interview.
I think one thing a lot of people don't know about the new trade agreement, USMCA, if you will, is that there's actually a chapter on gender equality in there. What does it do?
We've brought in stronger protections for environmental rights, labor rights, women's rights, indigenous rights than any trade deal Canada has ever signed until now. And one of the reasons we did that is because there's a lot of people worried about trade deals. We're seeing protectionist waves all around the world where people say, trade ends up hurting the little guy. Is because there's a lot of people worried about trade, that it gets shared properly.
In these negotiations, who made the case for the gender part of this deal?
Well, the entire focus of these trade negotiations was on my end, making sure that we had something that worked for the middle class, because that's what I got elected on, but the United States.
Did your team, Katie, Telford, et cetera, did one of you lay out, okay, this has to address gender as well?
We have been negotiating new progressive trade deals for a while now. It was a big part of.
For contrast, here's an everyday situation from my company and how I make sure to give my employees honest and direct answers so that they can maximize their potential in an authentic and organic way.
So,
Yes?
can I leave for today? It's just that you said if I finished early, I could leave early.
Well, have you finished?
Yes, sir. Can I go?
Did you call the bank in Zurich?
Yes, sir. I made them agree to the $1 million deal.
Did you mop the floors?
Yes, sir.
Are you happy working here?
Yes, sir, I am. Can I go?
Well, see, the thing is, in this company, I try to make sure that everybody's happy. And right now, I'm not happy. I'm not happy because you're not happy.
Sir?
Well, if you're happy working here, it wouldn't be right for me to tell you to leave early from the job that makes you happy, would it? That would be exclusive of me. And you know how much this company promotes inclusivity. You understand, right?
Well, I guess
Good, I'm glad we agree. We have a long day ahead of us. That's right, I got the Boss of the Year award for a reason. If there's one thing politicians won't admit in an interview like this, it's that they've made a mistake or haven't been responsible enough, because that would fly in the face of their self-branding as being competent and reliable. Ironically though, their attempts to evade the question might just hurt their reliability even more than making admissions would. Next, we see how Trudeau reacts to the interviewer suggesting that one of his plans wasn't good enough. His reaction is telling.
I want to talk to you a little bit specifically about international students because we're going to host 900,000 international students this year, which is triple the number from a decade ago. Because we're, again, why wasn't there a better plan to ensure that they had a safe place to live before granting all of these visas?
Again,
is this really the country that we want to be? I think.
Again, it's a question of a confluence of factors coming together and multiple partners needing to respond in different ways.
Twice he uses the adverb, again referring to what he wants to establish as fact, that he's given the same type of answer previously about other topics.
Again, is this really
it's
the implication being that this question isn't particularly damaging to him, supposedly, even though his initial reaction and his reaction to the immigration question so far appear to tell a different story. And what is the answer he gives? A confluence of factors coming together. An answer which is so generic that it could be used to answer almost any question, and which, thus, can be used as a serious and concise answer to this particular question. His mentions of these external factors make it seem like he has the best intentions. This is a way of sharing blame, or probably more accurate, assigning blame to these external factors.
Universities like welcoming in international students because they pay higher tuition fees. And that has had an impact on student housing in a way that we're directly going at. The new announcement on GST removal for apartment buildings will apply to student residences, for example. And we're working directly with provinces and with the institutions to make sure if they're bringing in more international students, they're creating purpose-built housing so it doesn't further exacerbate the shortages around the neighborhoods.
Intentions work well as a political strategy. Intentions make the politician look like a good person that people can look up to, and more importantly, that make people feel good. Making people feel good is at the core of political rhetoric. However, he wasn't asked about what he is doing now or wants to do in the future. He was asked about the past, why there wasn't a better plan. He's modified the question in a subtle but nonetheless crucial way. Politicians will make the modification and go straight to the sales pitch. Therefore, again, interruptions are necessary to get to the bottom of the issues, or get anywhere in the conversation. Next, Trudeau does two things. He makes a sales pitch about why the country needs exchange students. He continues until he's interrupted. After that, he continues sharing or assigning blame, uninterrupted.
But we know Canada has a tremendous potential to have a positive impact in the world and in our own economy by bringing in more international students. We need to keep bringing in international students.
But is it fair to be putting them in the position that they're in right now, right? It's quite upsetting to see, actually.
It is, and that's why the federal government is part of that solution. But as we know, it's provinces that make determinations around student levels. It's the institutions themselves that are doing it, making sure we're getting everyone at the table to work constructively to solve that.
It is, but with this conjunction and the bowel stress in provinces, Trudeau puts greater emphasis on the blame sharing or blame shifting, depending on how you look at it, rather than the part about how upsetting this is, supposedly. A vague announcement like work constructively to solve that once again points to the self-branding as the most prominent or only goal of politicians in interviews, because it sure isn't to clarify what constructively actually means or how much time it will take. As a side note, constructive has become a new management term, along with other intentionally vague, deceptive terms like inclusivity and representation. Deceptive because words like these often, or almost always, mean the opposite, that there are groups of people that companies don't want to include and don't want to represent for various superficial and discriminatory reasons.
Is part of, it's again, part of the complexity of Canada that it would be lovely to sort of say, okay, I'm going to snap my fingers as Prime Minister because I'm the boss of everything and it's going to fix. That's not the way it works.
Everyone knows that that's not how it works. That's not the question. The question is how he's solving it, aside from working constructively, which is a generic non-answer. So the only reason for stating the obvious like this is to grant himself leeway, even evade responsibility.
Part of, it's again,
with the adverb again, he once again refutes the idea that this is a particularly difficult question to answer, even though his way of answering it has actually pointed to precisely that he finds it difficult. He says again, as if any question can be answered by referring to other entities. Complexity of Canada, as he generically calls it here. Maybe he knows it can't, and that's why he laughs, because he knows he has a self-interest in oversimplifying things like this.
So, the steady hard work, the understanding and accepting of all these different factors and actually bringing these partners along in a constructive way is the way we choose to do it now.
In rhetoric, there's a concept called the nonsense factor. This concept covers statements that are so obvious that everyone would agree with them. Like if I say, I believe in freedom, or I want justice for all people. Here, Trudeau says they choose to bring different parties along and work in a constructive way. That word constructive again. We identified the nonsense factor by asking the question, who wouldn't agree with this? He says they choose to do it this way, but who wouldn't choose to do it this way? People don't want to hear that Trudeau's working constructively. That's a given. They want to hear what he's working constructively on, and how long this constructive work will take.
What would you say to someone listening to you talk right now about housing in this country and who might be thinking to themselves, this is too little too late? If I was a very cynical person, that what we are announcing right now may be because the poll numbers are what they are.
We've heard from Canadians very clearly the level to which this is a huge challenge.
Semantically, the noun challenge has emphasis on the overcoming part, while the alternative problem has emphasis on the difficulty part. In this context, challenge seems like a euphemism, a mixture of wishful thinking and the optimism that a prime minister or president always has to show or fake. I think we've all heard CEOs say challenge instead of problem. It's no coincidence, it's part of the new management handbook. However, as we see in the following, this question startles Trudeau to such a degree that he resorts to a blatantly irrelevant answer.
This is something that requires us to work in meaningful, tangible ways to solve. And we have solved this problem before. When World War II ended and all the soldiers came home, we had to build massive numbers of homes. In the waves of immigrations from people coming from devastated Europe, we solved that problem as a country.
If we've succeeded before, we can succeed again is the line of reasoning. First of all, how can problems from over 70 years ago be linked to present-day problems when the historical context and societal structures and circumstances are so completely different? And secondly, how can past events ever be used to make people believe in a politician's present-day promises? This segment shows the lengths that politicians will go to for self-branding. This appeal to national ethos, as it's called, underlined by the associating pronoun we, sounds a lot like the last resort.
We have solved this problem before.
Next, he disguises a command to people about how they should perceive him as a prediction of how people will react.
The question that people will ask politically over the coming years is which government or which potential government has the solutions to this really big problem. And that's what people are going to look at, not what is the perfect way to do it, who has the best plan, who has the track record, who has the ability to bend this curve as we have. And I'm confident about that.
Framing it as a prediction sounds a lot nicer than the command or instruction he means it as. Next, he faces the most skeptical question yet.
Well, what about, just to push back on that, people might think that you actually haven't bent this curve at all, because if you had bent the curve, then we wouldn't be where we are. And that actually you don't have the track record. And that maybe it's time to give someone else a shot.
Well, listen, then let's contrast the plans and the solutions, whether they're real, grounded in science and evidence solutions, or whether they're just feel-good slogans and bumper stickers. Happens in sound bites and shouted slogans and bumper stickers.
Because of course, he wouldn't dream of saying unspecific, feel-good things.
Are we going to go back to the failed policies of the Harper years, or are we going to keep moving forward? And we want to cut taxes for middle-class Canadians. Andrew Scheer wants to scrap the first and only national climate plan Canada has ever had, and we will always do more to fight climate change.
Building a better today and tomorrow for you and for your kids. This is the foundation of everything we do. Feel-good slogans and bumper stickers.
What's interesting is that he shows awareness of such strategies, that it's on his mind. He knows what political advertising is all about, making people feel good. People have a tendency to reward the person who made them feel good and optimistic. The power of words shouldn't be underestimated. It's interesting to see that he reveals more and more about what's on his mind as the interview becomes more and more negative towards him.
The question that we always have to ask is,
He's associating with ordinary people in the instructions he's giving.
Would it have been worse if we hadn't lifted a million people out of poverty over the first few years in government? Would it have been worse if we hadn't created 1 million jobs? Would it be worse if we didn't move forward on $10 a day childcare? Would it be worse if we weren't building reconciliation with Indigenous people to create economic prosperity there? Would it be worse if we weren't drawing in investments like Volkswagen and Stellantis and others that are creating jobs and careers for the future?
As we see, he uses the association to get back to the sales pitch, the self-promotion. In the process, he keeps repeating the phrase,
would it have been worse? Would it have been worse? Would it be worse? Would it be worse? Would it be worse?
This is called episusis, the repetition of a word or a phrase in quick succession. It's a way to emphasize a phrase in order to increase its impact and hence its memorability. Oftentimes, if not most times, if not every time, people remember the politician's rhetoric more than they remember the substance of what the politician said. Rhetoric matters.
The question that we always have to ask is,
He says these are questions we have to ask ourselves, when the fact is these are self-promoting, self-serving questions meant to persuade the public about his competencies. Thus, the use of the pronoun we is unreliable.
Canada is the best positioned of any country around the world. We have the lowest deficit in the G7, the best economic position of all the large economies, but that's cold comfort to someone who can't pay for their rent or buy their groceries.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the future. And the question people need to see answered is...
Trudeau makes another tactical move. He accommodates the interviewer by repeating her word choice, because previously she said this.
There is so much more to do, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Can you see how that's cold comfort to a young person stuck in their parents' basement or in a basement apartment, and they can't get out of the apartment because if they do, then they're gonna see their rent double.
And now Trudeau says the same thing.
But that's cold comfort to someone who can't pay for their rent or buy their groceries.
Yeah.
So this is a way of anticipating her objections and simultaneously showing that he takes her concerns seriously, allegedly. But the fact that it's his own self-interest that wins, so to speak, is evidenced by the second time he uses the contrasting conjunction but. This conjunction minimizes or negates that which preceded it.
But that's cold comfort to someone who can't pay for their rent or buy their groceries.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the future.
The self-branding always wins.